Hello, please let me see your ticket stubs for the double-edged double bill. Tonight, Godzilla and Ghidorah are on a revenge parade. Each week, Adam Thomas and Thomas Mariani will come to the table to discuss the randomly selected yin and yang of a double feature. Then, both will have to pick a number between 1 and 10 in order to seal their fates for the next episode. One will have 2 good movies, the other will have 2 bad ones. Let the chaos begin. I am Adam from Infant Island Thomas.
And I am Thomas Mothriani.
That was really well done.
Because I glide like Mothra through the skies.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I do, yeah. But we have another kaiju monster coming in with us here. With a purposeful grimace and a terrible sound, Sam Brutuxan returns for his record 4th round. Sam, how you doing?
I'm here to kick ass and shoot radioactive towers, and I'm all out of radioactive towers.
That might be a problem, Sam. I think you might have some sort of cancer at this point.
Yeah, you might want to go see somebody.
Yeah, I assume that maybe if I imitate art, then art becomes reality. And art became cancer.
Well, yeah, but you would assume it's like, oh, I'm going to grow to like Kaiju says. It's like, no, you're going to die of a horrible, painful, slow death.
I'm just going to die. I'm not going to become the 50-foot Sam Brutuxan. I'm going to become the 5-foot ditch in the ground.
Danny DeVito?
That's what we all ultimately become at the end, right? Yeah. We become Danny DeVito.
Mm-hmm.
There are worse ways to go out. Anyway, so Sam, we have you on here because you've been on, like I said, 3 previous times. And in those 3 previous times, we talked about how you're a pretty big expert at stuff like cinematic simians and Star Wars, of course.
Dinosaurs.
Yes. I know you are also a major fan, obviously, in reference to the dinosaur thing, especially of Kaiju. And we decided to have you on here because we're doing Godzilla films in honor of Godzilla King of the Monsters is coming out. And are we excited, Sam, for that?
Nah, not at all.
No, I don't see you post every single day about
it. No, I don't say shit about it. That Seth Rogen movie, that's that's big.
The long shot.
The long shot. Is that even out already?
It's been out for like 2 weeks, I think.
Oh, okay. Well, there you go.
But Sam, you're a huge fan of Godzilla. Where did that stem from?
Honestly, it stemmed from like around the time when Jurassic Park came out, and Jurassic Park was such a huge influence on me growing up. But it wasn't just that; it was also a mixture of that and watching like Destroy Monsters, Godzilla's Revenge. It was this properly timed blossoming into what became like one of the biggest cultural things I was into around the time, and it kept growing and growing, just like my big old lizard pal, Thomas Mariani, of course, I meant.
Yes, keep growing and growing. It's a problem. But admittingly, Adam, you on the reverse talked about it at the end of our last episode where we did our picks, despite Godzilla being a huge sort of figure since 1954 when he premiered in the original Gojira, you weren't really aware of the individual films. You hadn't seen as many, right?
Right. I'm aware of most of them. I've heard probably of all of them just from being involved in the horror genre, be it through writing or going to conventions or reading the magazines or whatever. But I have not seen nearly as many as I thought I have. I think there are several of them that I believed that I've seen just because of reading about them, like Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla or Space Godzilla or any of those. Both were fresh watches for me, and after watching these 2, I went and started watching some of the other ones that are available on Prime, and I got a lot of research to do.
I'm sort of like the middle ground between you two gentlemen, where I'd seen probably about half of the Godzilla movies to some degree, many of which were thanks to Sam in previous sort of watching sessions. I ended up because I have the Criterion Channel streaming service.
So hotty toddy.
Yes, of course. I could be watching more Godard, but instead I'm watching Godzilla. That's what I've been doing. And I've been watching a lot of the Showa-era Godzilla movies, and what's so fascinating, despite the big production around them, the huge monster suits, the elaborate sets of like all these cities that are being torn down. I love how sort of weirdly improvised and by the seat of the pants they are, with especially the fight sequences. There's just so much earnest, weird, bizarre energy in the best ones. In the worst ones, there's stock footage of those earlier moments, awkwardly spliced in. Which we'll be talking about tonight, because we have our two movies. We have our good pick and our bad pick that we picked at the end of our last episode, where our good pick is the 1964 film Ghidorah, the Three-Headed Monster. And then for our bad pick, we have the 1969 film Godzilla's Revenge, which are first two films from the 60s. So we're breaking this decade open with two Godzilla pictures.
Yep, we are all about nostalgia on this one.
All about it, even though the second title, the subtitle, All Monsters Attack, is a straight up lie.
We're going to talk about how many various different fucking titles these movies have in just a second. So let's get to our first title of, I think, 5 titles for this movie. Ghidorah, the Three-Headed Monster.
Nothing the screen has ever shown before can surpass the thrills of Ghidorah, the Three-Headed Monster. Created from an atomic fireball hurled from outer space, Ghidorah, the Three-Headed Monster, battles Godzilla, Mothra, and Rodan for mastery of the world. All new, all never to be forgotten. A new high in screen terror. Ghidorah, the Three-Headed Monster.
Ghidorah, the Three-Headed Monster, a.k.a., and I'm going to run through all these goddamn titles right now that we have listed. Godzilla vs. Ghidorah, the Three-Headed Monster, a.k.a. the Three Giant Monsters, the greatest battle on Earth, a.k.a. Monster on Monsters, Ghidorah, a.k.a. Earth's greatest battle, a.k.a. Ghidorah, the Triphallic Monster? It's like, what the fuck?
I'm assuming tricephalic. Either way, it's very interesting.
Yeah, these are all various different titles from either American re-releases or other country re-releases that are, I'm assuming, badly translated on IMDb.
I like Monsters on Monsters. That sounds so dirty.
I know.
Good old monster on monster action.
Exactly.
Tricephalic action.
Yes, and this came out in December of 1964 in Japan, and then September of 1965 in the US. It's directed by Hishiro Honda, who directed both of our features. It's rare that happens for something that's not based around a director on our show. But he also directed, I believe, about, 7 of these Godzilla movies in the Showa era, since the original, right, Sam?
Yep, he directed them, and he's had a good handful of them. And then, I believe the co-director, Tsuburaya, went off to do his own thing, obviously, with Ultraman and such. And that's, that partnership kind of lets him splitting off into different avenues, one of which is the tokusatsu genre, and the other one is the kaiju genre.
Right, and can you explain the difference between those two?
Well, basically, tokusatsu is basically like a superhero, right? It's like a giant, like Ultraman, for example, is all about a man wearing a latex suit. And then, of course, the kaiju stuff is your Godzillas, your Gorgos, your Gamras, especially your Gorgos.
Right, and of course, those would end up sort of crossing streams once you get to, the one where Jet Jaguar shows up. These Godzilla movies. Yes. So, Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster is the 5th Godzilla film overall, and is technically a direct sequel to Mothra vs. Godzilla. Mothra vs. Godzilla actually only came out about 9 months before this movie came out in Japan.
That's insane.
I know. That was such a huge success. They're like, oh fuck, new one. Make it a direct sequel, and also create a new monster, which this is the first appearance of King Ghidorah, who is the three-headed dragon that has sort of become the big villain for Godzilla to fight usually, right, Sam?
Yeah, it's generally the big shoe-in for your first feature films, because ever since then he showed up several times. He didn't show as many as I previously thought, because he showed up in that, showed up in Destroy All Monsters is obviously the big villain, and then he showed up again in Godzilla vs. Gigan. But whenever he showed up, there was always the big thing. It's just Ghidorah is just this mysterious three-headed dragon creature that they either came from space or came from an alien race that made him, or just they found him in space in some sort of dumpster behind a space 7-Eleven or whatever. It's weird. It gets kind of mixed up at a certain point what his origins are. But the point is, he's there. He's a big bad, and you know what he's about.
Right, and he's the first one that actually came from space, as opposed to from a mysterious island or due to our own meddling in nature. He's just no, fuck it, he's an alien.
Yeah.
and he just comes down. And this, I would say, obviously the original Gajira is technically I would say the best made of sort of these era Showa movies, and probably the most consistent one. But at the same time, if you want sort of a trilogy of movies that sort of represent the Showa era at its best silliness, it's King Kong versus Godzilla, then Mothra versus Godzilla, and then, of course, would you agree with that, Sam?
Yeah, I absolutely would agree. It's not just the silly behavior of these monsters; it's also the character and personality that's added to them as well. That's the big deal about it. It's not just a bunch of like people say, "Oh, it's men in suits just fighting each other," but there's more to it than just that. Obviously, there's a reason why you are so fascinated with watching Godzilla beat the shit and kind of troll King Kong around in that movie, right? Otherwise, why would you even bother, despite the fact that there are two big properties around the time? Same goes for Mothra, who's obviously this big deity, but obviously has an important role to play, and has this lavish sort of like supernatural aura about her in those movies. And Ghidorah is just there as kind of like a big bad, but as a big bad, he does his job, I say, well enough to warrant him being that central villain.
But you know what? This was Adam's pick, and Adam, I believe you hadn't seen this one before, right?
That is correct.
And what'd you think of Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster?
I think it is a wild fucking movie, man. There's just so much going on in here, especially for someone like me who's not that versed. Like when the little people from Infant Island showed up and started, Mothra, like what the fuck is going on? Then the Venus Princess, and then the like fucking hitman from Venus trying to kill her. I mean, this was just insanity. But it all worked together. Like, none of it felt like this is just too off the wall. It just totally made sense in this universe. I really thoroughly enjoyed it. I absolutely loved it. The suits, especially Rodan, looked pretty rough. But other than that, I mean, I think it's a fun movie, man. Like I said, this made me want to go back and watch all the ones I haven't seen.
In reference to the suits thing, when we get to like later movies in the Showa era, that's where you really start to see the seams literally tearing apart. Like I was watching Godzilla vs. Gigan, and I was like, oh man, you can literally see little strings coming off of Godzilla's underarms. Like the suit's completely dilapidated at a certain point. It gets like a lot worse in that regard.
Yeah.
But no, I think what Sam especially was talking about with like the personality of these creatures really comes to light in like these three movies I was talking about, and especially I think in Ghidorah, where there's a whole sequence that involves basically Rodan and Godzilla fucking around with each other, and then Mothra comes in and sprays them with silk, at one point doing so to Godzilla, and Rodan laughs, and then doing the same to Rodan, and then Godzilla does like a belly laugh, and he just like gets on the ground kneeling over. That's so charming and so interesting, and it really does endear you more to these giant monsters. Yet at the same time, also, it shows a bit more complexity where, like, Mothra is trying to talk to them about, like, hey, we should save the humans, and it's translated through our two little twins that are Mothra's keepers, basically. I love the fact that they're trying to goad Godzilla and Rodan into doing this, and they have such a nihilistic attitude, but like, no, fuck humans. We just want to fuck around and, like, play volleyball with boulders.
Well, with Godzilla has a somewhat justified reason as to why he feels that way, but like Rodan's just an asshole. Rodan is just there because he's a prick. He's an asshole. He's kind of like the Steve Buscemi of the three, just all around just prick, and he loves being a prick, and that's honestly what makes Rodan so charming from a certain perspective.
I just also like the fact that these monsters have these personalities, and at the same time it contrasts with the humans who are like really willing to go along with it. I love how these human characters are just like, oh, they're talking? Sure, that makes sense, but are they going to save everybody? This universe and how they're just so fine with what's going on. Like, the opening bit of this being like, oh, that weird game show about like, hey kids, what celebrity do you want to meet? Mothra. Oh, we can't get Mothra, but we have her two twin guardians here who can sing her into existence on our show.
Yeah, I love that so much, because it's not just it's not the fact that it works within the movie, but it's the fact that like they were previously set up in like the original Mothra, where they were taken from their island and their captors were like, we're gonna put you on a show for you. You're gonna make this big show. We're gonna make tons of bucks off of it. And it got spearheaded off of that into this movie where they're actually involved in the show, and they're trying to like be more involved with humanity and stuff, and being more of the heralds of Mothra.
They're her PR team.
Basically. Mothra says don't let her.
Right, Mothra has a huge rider, and you don't want to fuck with Mothra at this point. But, like, Adam, I did want to ask, like, were you at all confused at this point when they're just talking about, like, oh yeah, Mothra had 2 offspring and one of them died and all sorts of stuff? Did that, like, kind of bother you going into this?
No, not really, man. I mean, because I kind of just went with the flow. Like I said, I know that, but then again, I already kind of knew the history of the movies. I knew Godzilla vs. Mothra was before this, so I just assumed that was... I was able to piece it together pretty easy. This is not the movie to sit there and like, what does this mean? Like, pick it apart. You just kind of got to go along for the ride and just sort of enjoy it at face level. You know what I mean? And then maybe read more into the subtext, but just watch it and enjoy it.
Right, yeah, from the moment sort of that airplane sequence happens, where the princess is looking out the window and sees a comet that is Ghidorah coming down, and then she instantly becomes a Venus alien, which I guess is the implication that she was actually someone descended from Venus and forgot about her history and now awoke the Venus personality in her.
Guess.
Right?
It's all a big mystery. Woo.
But that doesn't matter at the same time, because then she becomes a fucking newsie from Venus, which I love her stupid outfit. And how everyone is just like, oh, look at this silly woman going around saying she's from Venus. But she has this total determination. That actress, to her credit, this is going to be the first of many Japanese names I mispronounce on this show.
I'm not even going to try.
Akiko Wakabayashi?
Yep, sounds about right.
Right, for sure. I love her sort of stone-faced demeanor. Like, she's doing some, like, weird Clint Eastwood vibes when she's just, like, staring down people and shit. I think she's a delight to watch whenever she shows up, and is especially so cold-hearted. And, like, when the assassins show up and she's just, like, completely stone-faced during any of that. That just sort of, once again, ability where people are just like, sure, she's from Venus, okay, let's get her out of here.
Easily, I say easily steals the show in the entire movie. That's not a bad thing, considering I think most of the performances in the movie are pretty charming. And coming from someone who always keeps hearing, like, well, like, in terms of acting tier lists, the original Gojira, like, has some of the best performances and has the best performance from Serizawa. And that's not really true, considering that the later Showa ones, especially Godzilla vs. Mothra, has some great performances. And this one especially, I wouldn't say this rivals that, but I'd say this is a really good performance that works within the context of the movie.
I think what works, too, is with Godzilla movies, the human stuff can often be a crapshoot. It often can just be like, oh, the Godzilla and his fellow kaiju are attacking, meanwhile the humans are like having an island adventure, or something in name that you don't give a shit about, versus the stuff with the humans here is so consistently entertaining, which is like, alright, they gotta help this Venus lady, and they're with the Peanuts, which is the name of the duo that plays the 2 Mothra twins. They gotta help them out, and also there's assassins, like you mentioned, Adam, which the assassins are my favorite characters just because so much horrible kaiju stuff is going on around them, and they are dedicated to their mission.
Oh yeah, they don't give a shit.
Yeah.
I mean, there's literally crumbling around that one guy, and he's got like a hunting rifle.
That is the other thing that I didn't realize until I rewatched these movies later on, where it's just like, initially I was just like, well, that's stupid. Why isn't he paying attention toward a rubble falling off of him? And I'm just like, well, this is already a world that's established. Like, Godzilla attacks Tokyo almost every month now. Like, this is just like as common as it is like any sort of natural disaster that's expected to happen. So like, I take it in that regard and looking through it that sort of lens, in honesty, it's just like, yeah, I'd believe it that these assassins know their way around Godzilla, and whatever happens, but they're just dedicated to that job.
It's like mild earthquakes in Los Angeles. It's like, oh, it's a Godzilla day again. Would you agree, Sam, this is the most consistent human stuff compared to most of the other Godzilla movies?
I'd say Godzilla vs. Mothra has that beat. But the thing is, like, Godzilla has a strong history of, like, when it's done right, like, the female protagonists are always, like, the big standout performances. With that one, with All Out Monsters Attack, with Godzilla Gets Mechagodzilla, like, there's always, like, a strong female performance that resonates and, like, has a strong emotional depth to it. Like, in that movie, what I love the most is just like the woman reporter in that movie is just like, look, I know your island's important, but if we don't at least try to band together, then we might as well be useless. And that's the big thing about the early Showa stuff, and it's why I prefer this in Godzilla vs. Mothra over the original. And that's a great movie, but for me, tonally and thematically, like, I love the perseverance of humanity and trying to band together in order to find a resolution and coexist rather than just it being like, don't get me wrong, like the message in Godzilla is very strong, but I think it's just a matter of how you personally feel about what thematic element works in those movies.
Yeah, either to band together or to get your hit on.
Yeah.
Adam, what would you say is your favorite moment of the monsters in suits?
I really, really did enjoy when they're in the doctor's lab, and then the shit starts crashing down, and it's Ghidorah out there with basically like the lightning lasers shooting out of his mouth, and he's just destroying shit. I love that part. But man, did I love anytime they showed the slug Mothra and all the people praying to him, and then the girls are singing to him, and she slowly works her way down the cliff, and then slowly crawls, and then, I mean, that just killed me. I thought it was so funny. That, and then Rodan flying around Godzilla, and it's like, for some reason, he makes the sound of a jet.
That's the other weird thing about the movie that I love that got carried from Rodan, because in Rodan, they were trying to make a comparison, like, Rodan's faster than an average F7 jet, and, like, they proved that by having him like make like airline clouds in the sky, right? Even though he's like a giant pterodactyl. So it's just like, how is that possible? But it's because he's really fast and can do that. And they brought that over to this movie, and that's another small detail that I really, really enjoyed.
Well, yeah, and you mentioned even that like Mothra and Rodan had appeared in their own sort of spin-off movies before coming into the Godzilla universe, as it were. And I love the fact that it kind of mirrors the Universal monsters, where Toho was just like, we're bringing back Godzilla. Do we have him fight Anguirus again? And don't we have like Mothra and Rodan? Yeah, let's do it. Another great moment for me with Rodan and Godzilla fighting each other is when Rodan picks up Godzilla and then drops him on that fucking electrical tower.
Oh, yeah.
Right on the dick.
Right on his crotch.
Oh, yeah.
That's not a good time.
Well, it's weird. Like, Godzilla's crotch gets a lot of abuse because later on, Ghidorah hits the lightning bolts directly at his crotch again. Like, he is suffering. I'm surprised he had a child later.
Oh, maybe that's the problem.
Yeah. As seen later in Son of Godzilla, you will know why. You understand why like kids gravitate so much toward these movies, because like they're depicted as kind of like immature and very much childish in a certain way, except for Mothra. Mothra is the only one who's actually like, sure, doesn't have speed, doesn't have power on her side, but she has the ability to think and logically work her way through fights.
She is the maternal figure.
Yes. Whereas the rest are just doing their own thing, destroying buildings and stuff, and complaining to mom that Rodan stole my Cheerios.
That's literally what that scene is. Just like, you guys gotta stop fighting and help the humans. Like, but we don't wanna.
I don't wanna.
This series deals a lot with bullying, as we'll get into in our next feature.
Oh.
But what would you say is another great moment for you, Sam, with these monsters in suits? Another underrated moment that we haven't talked about.
You mentioned the volleyball fight that happens early on, right? When you see that scene happens, that could have been like, oh, well, clearly they're just tossing a giant rock at each other. But there's actual effort put into like that scene. There's actual, like, you can tell the actors in those suits actually put work into that to at least like choreograph how that would work. Even though there's obvious limits to doing stuff in that suit, but like there's a lot of care into like making a silly scene work and have it feel fun and have it feel like, I keep saying this word a lot, but charming, but that's very much the case with this movie, and that's why it works so much, is because of that. It also helps that like you have scenes where Rodan is just bobbing his head up and down a lot, and like he's obviously like a big jokester, kind of just is out there just to laugh at other monsters and stuff. The thing about Ghidorah is that I understand he's like a big iconic villain, but I think the one thing I will say that's consistent with the show era Ghidorah is just like, Ghidorah just is there to serve just the one role, and I think he doesn't do it badly, but I don't think he does it enough to where it's just like, oh, Ghidorah, he's so terrifying, he actually means something. He's just kind of there to be a sort of a bully. To people who are saying that Godzilla is just nothing more than a giant monster, and that these giant monsters don't mean to anything because they're not characters, I think you have to take into account that when you're young and watching movies like that, especially from my perspective, you're not seeing them as just giant monsters. You're seeing them something more than that. You're seeing them as just somewhat mishandled this quote, but like in Godzilla's Revenge, you don't see them as like monsters. You see them as deities in a certain way, and I think that speaks more volume to how well these characters were made and constructed in these movies, as opposed to like any other 50s era giant monster movie where a Gila monster attacks a city. It's like it's a fucking Gila monster. Like, what is there to this? Or a giant insect, like a giant ant. I'm like, there's kitsch value to this. Nothing else, though, is happening in this fucking movie. It's boring, it's drab, and there's no personality to it. Whereas, like, these movies have that personality. They have that strive to try and do something more with these monsters and have them be more than the symbolism they were construed to with that original Gojira. And I think that's what makes this movie so beautiful.
Well, yeah, I mean, what I like about Ghidorah, especially here, is that they sell the threat of Ghidorah before Ghidorah ever sets foot on, land to destroy a city. When he flies over that pagoda, and just the strength of him flying over it causes it to dismantle. Like, that immediately sells the threat of Ghidorah without ever having him set on foot on land. And I think that's a great example of, like, how you can do that without doing the traditional Godzilla tropey stuff. But at the same time, you can have fun with that when all three of those guys are just beating the shit out of Ghidorah. That's a lot of fun. Just like Godzilla's fucking doing some wrestling moves and shit, just punching the shit out of his heads. So well done.
And that team attack with a Mothra being mounted on Rodan as like a Gatling gun.
Yeah. That works so well. And just also the fact that, like, all the work that's being put into that you mentioned, like, with Ghidorah, the guy in the suit, Shiroshi Hirose, I spent hours hunched over inside of the Ghidorah costume, and he had to hold, like, a crossbar for support, while people were up atop in the rafters, like, manipulating the heads with the wires. That's insane.
That's what I'm talking about. It's not just people have to be put in the suits. It's the work from the people who are up on the ceiling who have to control the wires. It's the fact that, like, you have to be careful if you're going underwater or being, like, if there's technicians on stage and stuff doing their own thing. Like, there's so much involved here and there's so much dedication. It's not just the fight itself. It's what's built around that fight.
Yep, that's exactly what interested me back when Pee-wee ran to the set of that Godzilla movie in Pee-wee's Big Adventure.
Yep, that's probably when I first was like, what is this? Well, no, I knew what Godzilla was, but when I saw Ghidorah and stuff, I'm like, oh, I gotta watch these movies. And then clearly I didn't. So, I'm a liar.
Pee-wee failed you.
Yep.
Pee-wee failed us all. I keep forgetting that Tim Burton is somewhat of a closet Kaiju fan because there's that and there's that scene in Frankenweenie with the giant Gamera.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, Ultimate Ghidorah works so much, and luckily, like, if you want to just stop at Ghidorah, you totally could. And it's totally its own self-contained thing. Maybe you're interested in, like, weird space culty stuff that happens, or, like, the weird assassination stuff in the movie. Like, there's so much going on here that there's going to be something for you.
I think we can serve that as your final thoughts here, Sam. And what about Adam, your final thoughts on Ghidorah, the three-headed monster?
I pretty much agree with what Sam just said. I think this is just a balls-to-the-wall, crazy, fun movie. The princess steals the show. Great kaiju action. Real good sense of nostalgia. I mean, I just think this is just a fun movie. And I don't think that you'd be lost if you hadn't seen any of the previous. I think this is a really good jumping in point if you know anything about Godzilla. I think you'd be fine with this one. Yeah, I really, really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I would say short of the original Godzilla, but also I think a super underrated one that Sam introduced me to, and I love it, is Godzilla, Mothra, and King Ghidorah Giant All-Out Monsters Attack, which is a more recent one. This is like my third in the overall Godzilla pantheon, because this is so much fun. It has that sort of sensibility, like I said, where it feels sort of improvised, but also like they're still following the continuity. This is the first time Godzilla's presented it all in like a heroic light, and it sort of starts an arc from here where he would become from, like the big representation of atomic horror in the original movie to eventually becoming sort of the savior. To become
our savior. This is the beginning point where Godzilla starts from mildly evil to becoming neutral, and then slowly, once he gets his son, and then once he starts, socializing with the other giant monsters on Monster Island, he starts to become more and more empathetic in a certain way, and becomes the hero later on in the show era, and I love that.
Yes, to keep going with my final thought, I really enjoy. No, I really dig this one a lot. It's especially with just the fact that, like, even the weird continuity thing of the main three heroes here are the same main three human characters in Mothra versus Ghidorah, but they're not the same characters. It's just the same actors. And initially, I was just kind of like, oh wait, yeah, they're not the same people, but also I don't give a shit because it's still just like a lot of fun, even having these repertory players come in and doing crazy things here with, fighting assassins and this Venus princess lady. It's nuts, but in a way that's endearingly nuts. But maybe not as endearingly nuts is our second feature, Godzilla's Revenge.
Fighting amongst each other for the conquest of our planet. See the giant spiders spin their web of fear around their enemies. Godzilla's revenge knows no limit. No end. No stopping. See man's last attempt at saving humanity from destruction. And Godzilla's revenge.
What's he revenging for? I don't know.
That's a great question, Sam, as we don't know what revenge he's seeking, really. And this is, as I mentioned, it's Godzilla's Revenge, or All Monsters Attack, or Minya, Son of Godzilla, or All Monsters on Parade, or Attack All Monsters, or Godzilla, Minya, Gabara, All Monsters Attack, or Great Charge of All Monsters.
Or Disney Slice Parade, Monster Parade.
Do any of those titles make any more sense, though, than Godzilla's Revenge?
I just wanted it to be called Giant Condor.
Well, that's what a lot of people wanted, including myself.
Yeah.
The underrated MVP of the entire Godzilla franchise is Giant Condor, the most creatively named one.
Right. You know exactly what you're going to get.
I find it hilarious that, almost all of the classic monsters return for fucking Final Wars, except for Giant Condor. No one cared about Giant Condor.
That's why Sam dislikes that movie so much.
I don't blame him. That's bullshit.
I just love in this sequence where the little kid has to name off all the monsters, there's Manya or Ebera and all these other things. Just Giant Condor is the finale of that name. Know. That's your punctuation mark, is Giant Condor.
Giant Condor! So?
That's the equivalent of saying Manda, the serpent from Atragon, Baragon, the monster from Frankenstein Conquers the World, and then Bird.
Bird, yes.
Pigeon!
Giant Condor, cousin of Big Bird.
Because of Big Bird. just plaster Big Bird into this movie and be way more interesting.
Yes, so this is the 1969 film that came, in terms of Godzilla films, this is the 10th one. This is right after Destroy All Monsters, which many would argue was sort of the initial start of a finale for these movies, because around this time they weren't that popular amongst audiences, but Destroy All Monsters was actually super successful, so they rushed this into production and it came out about a year later. If you had told me one of these came out 9 months after a previous Godzilla movie, this is the one I would have assumed.
110%. If you would have said 3 months, I'd have been like, yeah, that makes sense.
Probably. Because this is mostly made up of stock footage, which was a thing that happened a lot in these movies sort of later in the Showa era.
Supposed to Destroy All Monsters, that's when it really kicked in. I think the only one that's exempt for that is probably Ghidorah, because I don't remember that much stock footage.
Because nothing else from those earlier movies would fit in Godzilla vs. Ghidorah.
So, this kid is just dreaming all this shit.
Yeah.
So, there's no real point to this movie.
It's a coming-of-age story that's about a Monster Island, but it's not really about Monster Island. It's about this kid trying to confront bullies. And then there's burglars?
Yep.
Well,
and a toy maker.
Right.
Yeah,
well, this movie, despite clearly aiming toward children, is, what's the word, incredibly depressing? Everything about the kid's life is so sad, where he gets beaten up by bullies all the time, and he's a latchkey kid, and his parents have to work all the time to meagerly support their small little apartment they live in, and he has to receive some sort of guidance from this toy maker, but he mostly divulges into fantasy, where he dreams of hanging out with Minya, his only friend. This is his dream relationship with the fucking son of Godzilla.
Can't relate to all of this, by the way.
Is that why you might be the biggest defender, Sam? Is you slightly relate a bit more to our child protagonist here of Ichiro?
Minya tells me to fight my own battles, and guess what? I'm fighting my battle against Godzilla's revenge, and I'm gonna say I don't hate it as much anymore. That's my battle.
Oh.
So this kid just divulges into fantasy, which brought up my theory. I brought this up to Sam before we recorded. I don't think this takes place in a world where Godzilla is a real figure.
I don't think so either.
Thank
I don't
you.
think so either. Because this kid, he says a couple different names. Like, even, like, can we go to see Monster Island? And they're like, Monster Island? What? They have no idea what the hell he's talking about.
Well, I would argue they know what he's talking about, but it's more in the way of, like, Godzilla's like a pop culture figure, like Monster Island. It's like...
Yeah, that I could see. Yeah.
The movie's dismay, it is incredibly ambiguous how they're referring to Monster Island, and there's nothing in the background that's plastered showing you the world building of stuff that's been happening in the background with Godzilla, so you wouldn't have any clue if this was, like, just in this kid's head, or if this was actually a real thing that took place in this world, like the events of Straw Monsters happened or whatever.
The only vague reference is, like, there's a point where he's talking to his, like, little friend who's kind of his friend, but also she abandons him all the time anytime boys come around, and he says, like, oh, that car makes a noise like Minya, because it makes that same donkey noise that the fucking Son of Godzilla makes all the time.
And it's like, no, it doesn't, you liar.
You haven't seen him around. Yeah, it sounds almost like Minya is a Santa Claus type figure. Like, no, that's not real. You didn't see him anywhere. The thing is, that's the most interesting thing to me about this movie, because it weirdly feels like an unintentionally meta movie about a kid who is so devoid of any parental influence, like he has to divulge to fucking giant monsters to have some sort of parental influence in his life. It's super sad, but also just like, did Charlie Kaufman watch this movie and get inspired as a child?
You know what? I'd agree with you that it's super sad until the last, like, 20 seconds of this movie, and I'm like, man, fuck this kid.
Yeah.
Well, no, okay, we'll get to that, because that just underscores the tragedy of this movie so much more.
I mean, it changes everything. You're like, wait a minute. Aw, fuck that kid.
We'll get into that in a second. We'll get into that in a second for sure. But, yeah, so the only kaiju stuff that happens is either stock footage or these new sequences that were the dream of this kid. And you can tell the difference between what was new and what wasn't, because the Godzilla design changes from, like, shot to shot at certain points. And it's mostly taken from either Destroy All Monsters, or Son of Godzilla, or Godzilla vs. the Sea Monster with Ebra, the giant crab creature. And also from, actually, a non-Godzilla kaiju movie called King Kong Escapes, which, if you haven't seen, that's also a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's a really fun movie, but that was a crazy-ass pull for Gorosaurus. Like, I was, like, not expecting. The 1 mile credit I'll give for that is, like, they know exactly when to splice them in, those clips in, to make it feel like, yeah, this is all part of the same island, even though it clearly isn't, because there's a certain point where Godzilla's fighting Ebra out in the water, and I'm just like, it's clearly established that these monsters, after Straw Monsters, are kind of coexisting at this point. I mean, sure, they do their own thing, but they're kind of just there on this island just chilling. Yeah,
except when planes randomly come around and don't have any reinforcements after Godzilla destroys them.
It's like I'm sure Monster Island was protected at this point by the government, because why would you be attacking this island? But whatever. It's unfortunately the biggest example I can think of how Toho kind of is just, like, it was so money hungry around that time post Destroy Monsters, because Destroy Monsters was this huge hit. And then after this, they were just like, we got King and Godzilla films. And that's how we led to something from this to Terra Mega Godzilla, was because of that. That's why you see so much reused stock footage and why the script feels flimsy.
Right, it's such a bummer that this and then Terra Mega Godzilla are the last two that Jishiro Honda actually directed.
Yeah, it's sad, because, like, you can tell he obviously had bigger ideas to do with those ones. And that's why I have more respect for conceptually what the Godzilla's Revenge tried to go for at the very least, because Godzilla's Revenge is very much about a kid who was very much into Godzilla and is trying to relate to him through the eyes of his son, Minya. But the issue is that, like, it gets very muddled, and then they introduce the burglars, and it by the end, it's like he doesn't really learn anything.
No, he learns things. He just learns all of the wrong lessons. Like, every wrong lesson you could make.
Yep.
That's the thing where it's like, if this was just, like, a kid's movie, this kid hangs out with Godzilla's son and Godzilla, and he has, like, a lesson about standing up for yourself. It's like, alright, fine, that's not a good movie, but I could respect it like you're talking about. And then, like Adam was mentioning, the last 90 seconds of this movie completely flushed that down the toilet. It's a sad, depressing look at a child who has no idea of how to actually function in society and actually becomes a worse person because of it.
In the end, humanity is the real monster.
Exactly.
That's the message.
Right, but before we get into, like, that depressing weird turn the movie takes, there's only one new monster in this. It's Ghidorah, who I think could affectionately be described as, like, if Godzilla got a horrible skin disease and lost his tail. Also grew red hair for some reason as well.
Banged Raphael. The Ninja Turtles.
Maybe, a bit of that. And Gabra is this Godzilla-sized monster who is a bully for Minya, which says a lot more about Gabra than it does about Minya's attempts to, like, fight off, and everyone's like, come on, fight your own battles. Like, he's twice his size. And
well, also, no one else could have fought for Gabra. What was Anguirus doing? What was Rodan doing? Like, none of the monsters... But these monsters love to fight. Like, why weren't they involved?
Also, you couldn't come up with, like, a kid of one of those monsters, I guess. You couldn't have had, like, a baby Anguirus or whatever the fuck fight Godzilla's kids. It's like, no, this grown man fighting this child in Godzilla kaiju terms. It's so weird, and not to mention the fact that Minya can also shrink down to the size of our kid character and talks to him very verbally, which I admittingly, I watched the sub versions of both these, but my first introduction to this movie at all was a clip I saw online of Minya saying, "Godzilla told me to fight my own battles, which was the only way I knew about this.
I create my own legends.
It's so ridiculous, but not maybe in a way that's considered that consistently entertaining, but at the very least, it's mercifully short. This is 69 minutes long.
Yeah,
thank God.
It was just an hour, luckily.
I love this car, it looks familiar. Wait, this is my car. What is this doing in my front seat?
And what are you doing writing the script in the back of the seat?
Right. Who are you? Dude, this fucking movie. And you lost your license when you were looking down that hole earlier. How was he standing or whatever where his license fell out when he was looking down the hole? I mean, did he have it in his teeth? Like the other guy tickled him? Like, what the fuck happened? This movie is outrageously bad.
Honestly, the thing that shocked me most about this movie when I first watched it is just the fact that, like, I understand not having ties to Godzilla, and I think that could work, no, honestly, what this movie's going for. But the thing is, this movie really has no set of certain film style to it, right? Like Ghidorah, when you watch Ghidorah has a very set style to it, has a set tone. Ghidorah has a set tone to it, and those early Showa movies have a set tone. This movie doesn't really have a set tone. It's very inconsistent, and the soundtrack or the score doesn't really work itself any favors as well, because it kind of just plays at really the wrong moments, and I don't know, just kind of makes things seem more awkward.
Yeah, because like you mentioned Godzilla vs. Ghidorah, which some of you might know is Godzilla vs. the Smog Monster, is the one that would come after this, and is an insane, trippy, early 70s acid movie that's incredibly interesting. It's also way more horror-driven. I love that, like, the movie after this stupid kitty one is one where a kid watches as a bunch of people are covered in sludge and turn into skeletons. That's how insane the series gets, is that you have such contrasting previous movies to the next movies at certain points like this. But yeah, with Godzilla's Revenge, becomes kiddie at certain points, but also it feels way too dark for children whenever you have, like, the burglars who are kidnapping this child inside of this abandoned factory that looks dilapidated. And at any time, this kid could probably either be killed by these burglars or crushed by some sort of falling scaffolding. And it honestly just, like, bums me out, just watching this kid escape into fantasy whenever he isn't around any parental figures at all. Which leads into the ending, which we definitely need to talk about, is the kid ends up saving himself from these burglars through, like, inspiration of Minya using his fucking smoke thing after his, by the way, Godzilla being an incredibly abusive piece of shit parent. Like, Godzilla is an awful parent to this child at any point. He ends up saving himself from these burglars. Then it cuts to him the next morning as his mother, who had to work that night, which is why she wasn't around, being so apologetic, like, I'm so sorry, I'll never work again at night, just because I want to make sure that you're safe. And he's like, don't worry, I can fight my own battles, I can protect myself. And then he leaves, then she cries over the stove.
Yep.
It's so fucking depressing. It's just like, this woman realizes, like, I've lost my son. I've completely lost my son. I couldn't protect him, and I'm such an ineffective parent. And then he goes out and has this fight with the bullies that show up again that the entire time had happened. I'm like, is my computer buffering? because it's cut in a way that makes me think that it's just like really bad video quality. He's like, no, fuck you all, I'm gonna beat you up like this. But then he does the peer pressure thing that he chickened out of doing, where he honks the horn on the bike of this guy who's like painting a sign, which causes that guy to fall over and be covered in white paint. And that dude rightfully chases that kid down like, hey, you caused this to happen, you piece of shit. And this kid runs over to his dad, who's working at the train tracks, and is like, hey, this is totally my fault, but can you completely solve my problem? And this parent who says, like, oh man, I work all this time because I have to work hard so we can keep our apartment afloat, my family together, has to probably pay for that dude's clothes and his paint and everything else. So that's how the movie ends.
Yep, and of course, you did it, baby! The kids, for some reason, they keep saying that. It's just, yeah, what a terrible little shit this kid turns out to be. Like you said, he learned lessons, just none of them the right ones. I fucking hate this kid. Like, I wanted Manila to eat him. You know what I mean? Like, something happened to him. He's just a terrible, terrible little shit stain of a human. And, frankly, I'm angry at you, Thomas, for picking this.
It's all your fault.
No one suggested this to me at all.
No one did. Because I've obviously watched this movie so many times. It was honestly one of the first introductions to Godzilla I've had when I was younger. And it's understandable why, because it's like you have your main character being this child, right? And you watch it at that age. It's a very, like, aggressive but very, like, interesting movie that depicts childhood. So I wound up gravitating toward it, but as I got older, I hated it. And then when I got older, I wound up coming back around just like, this is a movie that's very much was rushed. It's a movie that was rushed. It was a movie that had like a script that was so rough. Like the dialogue for the parents feels very stilted and doesn't feel right. It needed way more time in the oven, and that's why I felt bad for Honda, because it's like Honda clearly wanted to make something that was more heartfelt than what was depicted here, because this is just it just felt very disingenuous by the end, and I don't think that was obviously the intent. And whatever groundwork was there, I can at least say, like, I like the weird scenes where, like, he's interacting with those little satellite box and whatnot, like he's doing stuff like that. I thought that stuff was endearing. It's just where it goes, I think, in the second half of the movie and how it like ties into burglars. I think it loses sight of that, especially loses sight of that at the very end with just knocking down the guy's paint and like almost basically might as well be like have broken that guy's back, considering the length he was falling at. Like that dude must have been seriously injured. Like it's more disappointing that it is like for me like something I can be angry at anymore. But that's just my own personal perspective, and that's where I'm at in terms of like when it comes to rewatching these movies, because a lot of the Showa era stuff I don't really hate as much anymore. Like the only one I do is Terror Mechagodzilla, and oh my god, to close in on this movie, it has a lot of imagination thought put into it, but no concrete execution, and an execution that completely backfires on it.
Yeah, to say the least, I guess. So I guess we're doing final thoughts then. Adam, your final thoughts, especially because I want to hear you, because I saw that you actually watched this with your daughter at a certain point. Was she consistently entertained with this or not?
She watched the whole thing, and I mean, she's going to be 4, so she's real young, but she loved it. She was calling it the dinosaur movie. She absolutely loved it. In fact, she sat and watched most of Ghidorah with me because I said, oh, it's another dinosaur movie. So, I mean, she loved it. I hated it, but no. So, I mean, it's kind of cool for that it might have opened up, a little bit of an avenue to where now I can watch Godzilla movies with my kid, and maybe it would do that for other people too. Piggyback on what Sam was saying, like it stars a little kid. There's Toy Maker in it, blah blah blah. But it's just when he knocks over Cowboy Sign Painter, like it just really fucking takes a dip. I mean, just a nosedive right off the edge at the very end, and it kind of cheats you out of anything that you just watched. So I personally don't enjoy it. I don't think people of an older generation who maybe hadn't seen it as a child before would enjoy it. And I mean, fuck that kid. Fuck all kids. Except for mine. Mine's a little pretty princess. But all kids. Fuck them.
Destroy all kids, basically.
Yes, all kids. Destroy all kids.
That's Adam's Kaiju film coming in 2025. But I mean, I guess I mostly agree with Adam, though the only entertainment I really got out of this was the dark world spinning that I did with this, of just like, man, this is such a sad portrait of an abandoned child who has no influence around him whatsoever to rein him in on his weird fantasies. That's the most entertainment I really got, because it's like Sam said, it's especially just so tonally inconsistent. And if it was more of a consistent, like, dumb kids movie thing, I'd probably be more endeared to it. It made me respect Son of Godzilla a bit more, which I also watched, like, right before, and I have a lot of issues with just especially how Minnie is kind of treated in a similar abused fashion in that movie. But at the very least, that movie had a more consistent tone and has some very beautiful moments, like especially the ending shot of that movie is really touching in a way that it almost didn't quite deserve. But at the same time, with like Godzilla's Revenge, this doesn't deserve much of any attention at all because of how much it like splices in older footage, and even the new footage is so poorly put together. Like, we didn't talk much about the actual Ghidorah fight with Godzilla and his lame electrical powers and shit. And there's a point where he gets catapulted, which was very funny. I would not say it's my least favorite of the Godzilla movies, though, because I have more issue with stuff like, obviously, there's the 98 Godzilla, or controversial opinion, I really hate Shin Godzilla, the most recent Japanese one. I thought that was such a bore that was endlessly long of a slog. Or even there was the 1984 Godzilla that I actually watched with Sam, and that one I also find just like so dour. At the very least, this one has an energetic speed to it that it won't be that much of a waste of your time, but it also won't stick with you except for, like we mentioned, the punctuation point that turns us from a cute kids movie to a movie that does not teach kids any sort of lesson that they should take to heart at all. It's a bad influence on your children.
The one good thing I will generally say about this movie is when the kid is listing off all the monsters like Manda and Gorosaurus and stuff. Like, it's so fun to actually look back on that and think about where those monsters actually came from.
So wait, the best thing about this movie is a Wikipedia list of all the monsters?
Yeah, because, like, here's the thing. That's why I love this universe so much, because it's not just, well, these monsters are just here just for the sake of it. No, there's actual history behind these monsters and their individual appearances. For God's sakes, like, Varan shows up in one scene in, like, Destroy Monsters. I don't know if he's in this one. I don't remember. But, like, he shows up in one scene to Destroy Monsters. But, like, he has his own movie. Like, that fucker has his own movie, and he's there for one shot. Like, what the fuck?
we love the Godzilla cinematic universe as much as you do, Sam, obviously. But at the same time, none of them really compare to Giant Condor.
Right. None of them.
No, none of them.
None of them.
At all.
Ever.
No. And on that note, praising our god, Giant Condor, that is the end of our discussion of our two Godzilla movies. But we still got some stuff to say before we do our picking for next week's episode at the very end, so stay tuned for that. First, we have some feedback we want to read, because over at DEDB Pod, which is our Facebook and Twitter page, every Monday we ask you all, hey, what's your favorite or least favorite thing related to a particular topic that we're doing? And we have some feedback about the Godzilla films, asking you guys about your favorite and least favorite ones. Brian Kane says, I feel like Shin Godzilla is the first since the original to make him feel like a legitimate threat. Most of what that movie was going for is inevitably going to be lost in translation, though. Godzilla's Revenge, aka All Monsters Attack, is terrible, schlocky, full of bad ideas, and is a must-see. Shane Steele says, favorites, toss-up between Destroy All Monsters and Final Wars. Worst, Godzilla 1998. And then James Rodriguez says, apart from the 2014 movie, Godzilla is one of my few major cinematic blind spots. So I'll say my favorite use of him was in Bambi Meets Godzilla, which is worthy for every minute of the film. Clever, James. Quite clever.
I clapped.
You clap like Godzilla claps after Rodan gets covered in silk.
Yeah, or when he's being shut up King Kong.
Yes, but are there any other ones that you'd want to spotlight, Sam, that weren't mentioned here amongst favorites or least favorites?
Like, not to get, like, because I hate All Out Monsters Attack with Godzilla's Revenge, and by the way, both titles make no fucking sense, but regardless of that, giant, like, All Out Monsters Attack, I think, well, GMK, as I like to call it, the early 2000s Godzilla, Mothra, Ghidorah, Baragon movie, worth checking out. It's from the director of one of the 90s Gamera movies. I think it's the third one, Revenge of Iris. I could be wrong. So worth checking out. Perhaps my favorite Godzilla movie.
And that's the one where Godzilla has like the white pupilless eyes.
The white eyes, and what I personally argue is a better rendition of what Shin Godzilla is going for, personally.
Yeah, that's a terrifying design that really works for him in that movie.
It really works for it.
What is this one called again? Say it again.
Okay, Sam, this is a very long title.
It's a very long title. So it's GMK, Godzilla, Mothra, King of Ghidorah, All Out Monsters Attack.
All right. I will try to find this one.
It's just put an all monster attack, and the thing that I hate about Godzilla's Revenge is just like A, titles don't make any sense, and B, that gets mixed up with all out monsters attack. It's one word that throws it off, and I hate it because it's like it's all monsters attack, and there's all out monsters attack. It's all out monsters attack is the one you want to watch. Personally, for me, like Godzilla vs. Destroya is really fun. That's a really interesting movie and has like one of the coolest suits ever for Godzilla, the nuclear meltdown suit, and also Destroya is I think a great monster design.
It's like Satan Kaiju, right?
It's basically Satan, but it works so well because it's the antithesis of the Oxygen Destroyer, basically. And then for Godzilla against Mechagodzilla, I think is fantastic. Like it takes the concept of Mechagodzilla and does it in a way that's more in line with something like, let's say, if you're familiar with like Neon Genesis Evangelion, it's similar to that, but done in a way that totally works for it and has a great central woman protagonist.
Right, and keep in mind, this is Godzilla against Mechagodzilla, as opposed to Godzilla versus Godzilla, which is the earlier one.
And Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla 2 from the 90s. So
yep. I love these titles.
These titles are great. It's the equivalent of the Dragon Z movie titles that go on for way too long, so that's why I just call it movie 12 or 13, whatever. Yeah, basically, keep an eye on those movies, and obviously, the shorter stuff, I recommend checking almost all of that stuff because it's at least interesting. There's not one, you'll at least have one movie you'll adore in that series. Like, it's the most consistent. As of recently, I'm hoping that King of Monsters lives up to the anticipation that comes with it.
Yeah, it's interesting with like the 2014 movie. Adam, where do you stand on that? Because I don't think we've ever talked about that. What did you feel about the 2014 Godzilla?
Needed more Bryan Cranston, less Aaron Taylor Johnson, more Godzilla.
Yep.
There was not nearly enough Godzilla in it. And the Mutos were so fucking stupid.
The Mutos were a big problem in that they were not very original. Like, they were obviously, like, the way they were created are very much that of, like, the Cloverfield monster.
Yeah,
of other pre-existing monsters, even like Gaios, Rodan, Gigan. It's just like, just get the license to acquire those monsters and put them in the movie.
Yeah, I agree.
And if you're going to make your own original monster, do like what the original draft for the 98 Godzilla was going to do, and just include like some mythological creatures like the Griffin, which was going to be the monster that Godzilla was going to fight in that movie, but it never happened. So just do something weird like that. Don't try and like make it like, well, we couldn't clearly get the rights to this monster, so we'll put in a monster that looks similar to it. Like, don't do that.
And I think at this point, though, with like Godzilla 98, I think the wound has healed enough in terms of like, that's a bad movie.
It's a bad movie, but it's not the worst, I would say. Like,
what would you say is the worst Godzilla movie?
Oh, Terror Mechagodzilla, easily. Here's the thing: I personally adore Gigan, even with the substantial issues like the reuse of stock footage. They just reuse half of the stock footage from fucking Mechagodzilla and substitute it for like half of the movie, and like there's this very dry human plot that like is so unwatchable. It's so dry and just drab to watch, and even with Titanosaurus, who shows up for 2 scenes, it's still not worth watching. It's just so incredibly boring.
And that's one of the ones on the Criterion collection.
Yeah,
that I could watch right now. So it's right up there, guys, with Blood Simple, Umbrellas of Cherbourg, Terror of Godzilla.
I guess, I mean, yeah, maybe it's worth rewatching? I don't know. I say don't.
Perhaps sound advice to avoid that in our Godzilla marathon. But we also had some feedback that came in right after we recorded about our Will Smith episode from 2 people who've previously been on the show. Scott Johnson says for his favorite Will Smith movies, Men in Black for sure, and he's really solid in Ali. For bad, I would say the worst thing he's slapped his name on is Shark Tale, but my least favorite performance of his is in Bright. Lance Langford of the Horror Returns podcast says, Bad Boys, Hitch, and Hancock were all fun. Wild Wild West was an abortion. I enjoyed his serious role in Enemy of the State, and he had no business ever being in the dreadful Suicide Squad.
Yeah, I can pretty much agree with most of those. I'm not a Hitch fan. I like the half of Hancock. But, yeah, Shark Tale's terrible, and we discussed Suicide Squad last episode. It was just a bummer of a movie.
Shark Tale is such a cursed movie to look at nowadays, because like you just see Will Smith's face, you see Renee Zellweger's face just plastered on those fish, and it's so weird and silly to look at. It's an equivalent of like Seaman from the Dreamcast.
Yeah, right. I agree.
even when I was a child and I was more of the target audience for that movie, it was still just unsettling. But I was just like, oh, they did Shrek. Shrek hasn't proved me wrong. I love Shrek because I'm fucking 12 and it's the early 2000s. And that movie's also just has such a strange ensemble cast. Where like Martin Scorsese plays a pufferfish.
Yeah, he does.
And it has his face on it.
I don't know why they put their faces on there.
The only one who doesn't really have their face plastered on is Jack Black. That's, to be fair, he's a shark, so...
But that doesn't excuse, like, Robert De Niro plays his dad shark, and it has Robert De Niro's face on it.
Oh, you're right. Kids remember Robert De Niro.
You all love Godfather jokes and Goodfellas jokes.
Kids will eat that shit up. They love it.
Right, exactly. And I think it's just that movie was sort of the epitome of, like, DreamWorks was infamous for doing this when it first started. About, like, oh, hey, we're gonna do the Robin Williams Aladdin thing, and we're going to promote the fact that our stars are doing our voices rather than the animation. And this was sort of like the weird point where that melded into one horrible, like, melted crayon of putting their faces on the actual animated characters. But anyway, so thank you all for that feedback. We also want to thank Chris Oliver for the intro and outro music using our show. Listen to more of his music at chrisoliver.bandcamp.com. Thanks to Emily Scarda for the art for our show. She accepts commissions at 502rs.com/eescarda. And Sam, usually you don't have much to promote on the show, but since you've been on, you are now a self-published author. Is that correct?
Yes. I have a new book out. It's called The Quietest Breaker Brother Death. It is part of a trilogy I've been working on for a while, and this is the first book that's out. Check it out when you have the chance. It's basically a book that's all about exploring the business underside of the underworld, basically, followed through the lens of this young, very witty young woman named Joanna Collins, who one day accidentally gets shot while working a shift at a retail store in Colorado and gets sent to the underworld with a bunch of weird sentient creatures who send her toward this place called Domain 224, and she sees a bunch of weird stuff, like there's a trolley that's self-automated. There's also this wash that actually has supernatural elements to it and does a lot of crazy stuff. It's overall a very eccentric book that I hope people can check out and let me know how they feel about it. Just whenever you have the time, just leave a review on Amazon, and just any sort of feedback is very much appreciated on it, because that's how I grow as a writer. That's how I grow as a self-publisher, and overall, expect to see more in the next few years. And I also have a blog called Lounging Lizard, and basically, I will be putting up posts almost every week regarding to my craft, how I made the book, and also just dumb stuff like. I do a weekly series called Bad Animal Poetry about like certain subsections of animals. Like last edition was about ringtail lemur, the slow loris, and the II or AA, whatever it's pronounced. And I go into weird sort of tangential stuff about these animals that are initially fact-based and then steer off into tangents, as I usually do with my whenever I talk. So. If you want to have a good time, there's that, and of course, the book.
Yes, so that's lounginglizard.blog is the blog, and then the name of the book is, once again, The Quietest Breaker, Brother Death.
Yes.
Yes, and I'm glad that you decided to take your first and only step on your book tour, a month after the book came out, to promote it here on this incredibly popular show.
You're going to reach tens of people.
Tens, if you exclude the 0.
Yes. Just you.
Just me.
Buy another copy of your books.
Right.
Oh boy, I can't wait to buy another 5 copies of this book. Wait a minute, I bought these copies.
But no, I'm really glad you're doing that, and especially I have read a lot of stuff on the Lounging Lizard blog, and the bad animal poetry is quite fun.
Yes.
Yeah, get a better literary agent so you can appear at different places than this place.
But my literary agent is just my local chipmunk.
Chipmunk, who should I promote this with? Double Edge Double Bill? Exactly.
That's the place.
Yep, for sure. But you can also follow us on Facebook and Twitter. We are on @DEDBpod, as I mentioned previously. You can also email us at doubleedgeddoublebill@gmail.com, or you can follow my own individual account at NotTheWho's Tommy. on Twitter and Instagram as well. And I write stuff at marianithomas.wordpress.com. And you can also hear me on the latest edition of the Horror Returns podcast, where I talk about the new release Brightburn and also Superman the movie starring Christopher Reeve.
Excellent. I am excited for Brightburn.
And you can find Adam, I believe, storming through Tokyo, right?
Yeah, I guess. I don't know. No, I'm depressed all the time. I usually just stay in my room.
Just like the Giant Condor.
Yep.
No, he stays in his room and dreams about the Giant Condor.
Oh, yeah.
That's his biggest parental influence, the Giant Condor.
Yep.
Officially raised him. And make sure to please subscribe to us on iTunes for more content like that, or on Stitcher, on Spotify, on YouTube. You can find the show there. And rate and review the show in any of those places to give us more visibility, so we can get some kind of attention for a poor, starved for attention boy that just loves the Giant Condor, like Adam.
God, yes.
Well, before you cry yourself into sleep again for this 5th evening in a row, let us do our picking for next week's episode, which, in honor of X-Men Dark Phoenix coming out, no, we're not doing X-Men related movies. No, we instead are doing movies about troubled productions, because that movie has gone through various different release dates and reshoots, not as much as its sister film, X-Men New Mutants, which is still unreleased after, 3 years, I think, of not being released.
Expect to see it in 2025.
I honestly, dude, I'm going to be very surprised if it ever hits the theaters.
I would see it way more likely coming out on the Disney streaming service, the Disney Plus.
That's or Hulu now, because they own Hulu.
Right, of course, it could go to either of those places, but because of all the troubled productions going on with X-Men movies, we are covering movies that have had sort of development hell troubled productions, which can add interesting context to movies that are sometimes already great or are much more interesting because of how terrible the productions were.
Yeah, this was an interesting one.
Yeah, it'll be very interesting to see what 2 movies we get, because I have the 2 good movies, and you have the 2 bad ones, Adam. And basically, at the end of every show, if you're new, each of us assigns these 2 movies we have a number between 1 and 10, and the other picks a number between 1 and 10 in order to see which good and then bad movie we do as our double feature for the next episode. But when we have a guest like Sam, they go ahead and pick numbers between 1 and 10. So Sam, for my 2 good movies, number between 1 and 10.
I'm going to go with my usual number 4.
All right. At number 5, I have an obscure one, but one that I'm very curious to talk about. It's a 2017 film called The Evil Within, which has no relation at all to the video game.
To a video game, yeah.
Right. And it's a movie that was made by Andrew Getty, who is one of the grandson heirs to J. Paul Getty of All the Money in the World. And this was the movie that he toiled over making for about 15 years in his mansion.
Oh, is this the one where he died, killed himself or died right before it came out?
He died right before it came out, yes. And so they ended up finishing production. It has Michael Berryman in it.
Yeah.
Right, and it has another person who died long before the movie was ever released in it as well. So that'll be a bit interesting, to say the least.
I never actually got around to seeing this one. So yeah, I'm definitely curious about this one.
I'm not even sure how necessarily good it is as much as it's a fascinating view into the mind of one particular auteur as just putting himself onto the screen. I think it's a really interesting movie. But, of course, at number 1, I had another very interesting movie that, despite being so critically lauded, did have an infamously troubled production, Mad Max Fury Road.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, I would never pick that. That's a good one. I'm actually more excited about The Evil Within just because I remember reading about it. I'm like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
Excellent. Oh, boy.
Well, now for his 2 bad movies, Sam.
All right, too bad. Well, let's see. How about we go with a whopping number 7?
At number 8, Thomas, I'm so sorry. 50 Shades of Grey.
Wait, really?
Yeah.
Does that fit into the trouble production thing, though?
Oh, yeah, dude. Yeah. That movie was in production for quite a while. It had Charlie Hunnam was originally cast, and then he dropped out, and then someone else was really cast, and they dropped out. It went through a bunch of different people. Yeah. Come on now, buddy. What do you think I'm doing here?
Well, what was your other choice?
The Lone Ranger.
Damn.
I mean, either way, it would have been really fucked on this.
Yeah.
I know. I kind of went for the gut. I'm sorry.
It's a very evil decision being made here.
I really did.
There's a lot of insidious evil that'll be coming from our next episode. But thank you for picking, Sam, and thanks for doing this. So why don't we go ahead and just storm off into the waters so we can return to our kaiju keeps.
Off into the underwater depths I go to eat my pantry full of some chips.
Long live the Giant Condor.
Long live the Giant Condor.